Hey, welcome to another episode of Tested VR. I am Adam Savage from Tested here in my cave, and this is a companion piece to a piece we shot recently showing how to do a weathering pass on a model using just acrylic paints and a couple of other materials. You can catch that video on Oculus TV, and today I'm going to show a counterpoint to this weathering technique. This is only one of the ways I achieve a wash across a model. The other, instead of acrylics, is using oil paints. And while the results are going to be similar, there are some key differences to the technique, and that's what we're going to cover. For my model blank, I've got this nice big gray piece of a ship. It is pre-coated with a Tamiya gray. I think it's actually the Millennium Falcon base color. That's not a spoiler. I'm not painting my Millennium Falcon right now, as much as I'd like to be. But I love the Tamiya primer lacquers. They go on quick, they dry fast, and they're hard. They're fantastic paints. So, without further ado, we're going to do a weathering pass on this piece using oil paint. Now, there are a lot of different kinds of paint, and what differentiates paint is the medium that it sits in. So paint is a particulate, a color, sitting in something that will dry. And in the case of acrylic, it's like a plastic media that off-gases and dries. In the case of oil, it is a solvent that flashes underneath the oil. And oil paints can take way longer to dry than acrylic paints, and that's actually one of the things I like about them for this kind of job. So we're going to start with a pass of just ivory black, your standard black oil paint. Got a little bit there. You don't need very much. A little goes a long way. And I've got some turpenoid here, your basic thinner for turpentine, your thinner for oil paint. And the smells, I love the smells. But here's how an oil pass, weather pass goes. It's really pretty unceremonious. I get some watered down, solvented down oil paint and just go at it. It is, it's like a murder scene. It will feel unnatural to do this, but this is a key part of the process. You're just gonna, the whole thing, just keep on going. You don't have to be too precious. You actually shouldn't be precious. You should be unprecious. I want to point out, as we're delving into this, that I notice that people are very reticent and nervous about a weathering pass. They watch a lot of videos and they're not sure they're going to get it right. I'm here to tell you that I'm never sure I'm going to get it right. That every single time I do a weathering job, there's some point in the middle where I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing, and someone should come and remove me from this. Like, despair is part of every paint job. Just prep yourself for it. Realize that at some point you're going to feel like a jackass and you don't know what you're doing. And the answer is, you don't know what you're doing. None of us do. It's why we do it. Okay, so now I've covered this in oil paint. Now I'm going to pull it back off using paper towel. And really, this is just, we're just going in. We're taking off as much as we can. Hold on, I'm going to cover my turpentine so it doesn't dry out. Give myself a little more room. And the thing about oil paints that you'll notice is that they move. It's not just, as you do this, as you pull off that original first pass, you'll notice all these ways in which the oil sits, first of all, in the interstices super darkly, and because it's a very thin paint, because of its solvent, it really casts new detail onto your piece. And moreover, you'll notice that you can pull off a lot or pull off a little. Like, there's a huge amount of actual, There's a huge effect you can have just by the technique by which you're pulling the paint back off of the model. And if you scrub really hard, you're actually going to show all the way through to the original base primer. This is a perfect pass of a wash, except that it is too uniform. And this is the thing to guard against with every weathering job you're ever going to do. Human beings are terrible at being random. Just look up any article about people who cheat the IRS. The way the IRS finds them is by checking for the randomness of numbers in their tax returns, because humans are so bad at choosing random numbers, you can often easily find patterns of cheating just by looking at the numbers. So remember that you're bad at doing random things, and try not to give your paint job too even a set of details. So, because I consider this a really nice wash, but it's overly even, I'm actually going to add a couple of dirtier stained spots here. So, I'm going to put a little more dirt over here. That's where I saw some that I liked. I'm going to put some in here, down there. I'm going to put, let's see here. I'm going to, yeah, all around this hatch. So, again, your inclination is going to be to like make it bilateral symmetrical. You want like giant stains somewhere. Just literally like hit it with something and then commit to that, right? Like, I want to point out that I'm not doing anything more complicated than hitting this with a cloth, and already I think the paint job is way better. It is non-uniform. It's a little more variegated, which the world is. Take a look at old buildings, take a look at old street signs, look really closely at them. You'll see all these witness marks of their history. That's what you're trying to replicate. Now, I think I've made too much of a clean spot there, so I'm gonna actually make it I'm gonna blend it a little more. And that's where, so the blending is where the oil paints really show their metal. Because oil paint takes longer to dry, you have a lot longer to modify and affect the paint job. So wherever it looks a little too, like the marks are too big or the scale doesn't quite work, and frankly, for some of this stuff, I get really close and look at it like, yeah. So now what I'm doing is I'm actually going across some of the surface details, and I'm trying just to take the paint off the high spots. The high spots is where a paint is always not. That's it. Oh, yeah. Oh, this makes me want to be painting the Millennium Falcon. All right, there you go. That is the result of a black oil wash across this model, and frankly, I think it's stunning. The very first time I tried to use oil paints as a detail paint, I was making a replica of the Conservatory of Flowers here in San Francisco. I built a scale architectural model for them for fundraising. And so it's tens of thousands of little tiny panes of glass, and I replicated every single one using model castings. And in order to show off that detail, I hit it with a big wash of oil. It was the wrong color and it just looked terrible. And I started feeling like, oh my God, I'm destroying this model. I spent weeks building, this is a disaster. And as I tried to pull this paint off, and I've got a spritz bottle with turpentine and I'm pulling it off, and all of a sudden, it's like the perfect paint job. In the attempting to rescue this model that I was convinced I was destroying, I got one of the loveliest paint jobs I had ever had up until that moment. That's why I like oil paints. So I'm going to let this dry for a minute, and we'll do a second pass with some burnt sienna, and then we'll take a look at the final product compared to the acrylic pass. You should know that there's no way I'm going to get the oil paint dry with a blow dryer inside of just a few minutes. Oil paint takes a long time to flash off its solvent. It's one of the advantages it has to painters. So in that regard, in order not to remove too much of the black paint as I put on this weather pass of the burnt sienna, I'm going to use a much smaller brush. Give me just a second. I've got a smaller brush here. I'm going to squeeze out a little bit of the burnt sienna. And my weather passes, I use almost exclusively 5 colors. Black, raw sienna, burnt sienna, raw umber, burnt umber. And then if I've got a lot of rust, I'll add an ochre yellow to that, because an ochre yellow, key spots of rust tends to make it just makes rust really pop. If I'm doing a copper weathered finish, like a verdigris finish, well, that's like phthalo greens and some other yellows. But for the most part, raw sienna, burnt sienna, raw umber, burnt umber, black. That's 95% of my weathering is just using those colors. So I'm just getting a little turpentine on my brush, and I'm making a little wet mixture here of some burnt sienna on my palette. And on this, I'm just going to be very judicious about where I put it. But again, like the acrylic pass, I am going to put it where I've seen the things get darker. I'm going to use it to call out some details. Rust tends to happen in the low spots. It also happens around things that tend to open. So like I'll put it over these hatches and then pull the paint off the top of the hatch, and that'll help look like, yeah, there we go. So the thing about, I'm using just my finger to do all this blending, and because of the fact that the oil paint is still wet, I'm actually pulling off some of the black when I do this, but we should be able to get enough detail here that you can really see how it kind of settles in and adds more depth. The fact is, your second weathering color is always a really vital step. I mean, frequently I use 4 or 5 different weathering colors, but you basically should never be using just a single weathering color. It's always like at least 2 passes. There we go. Oh, yeah. So, okay, for instance, like this line right here, watch this. I'm just gonna, that's it. That's all I need to do there, and I've got just a little bit of warmth in there, and now all of a sudden that line starts to tell a slightly different story. Oh, God, I love doing this. And let's see here. Yeah. Let's do a rust streak there. And oh, yeah. Looks great. Okay. Take a look at this part right here. That's just with the black wash, and I'm about to hit it with a little bit of the brown to show you how I like to get something looking even better. Just a couple of drops of oil paint and pulls out so much more detail, pulls out so much more story out of that piece. When I am trying to assess whether a paint job works, it is the most difficult part of design, which is making sure the overall composition works. So as I'm doing something like this, I'm often changing my orientation to it, looking at it under different lighting conditions. Sometimes I hold it farther away from myself so I can see it better from a distance. And I move it past my eye, and what I'm looking for, I'm kind of looking for the high spots. And by high spots, I mean the things that catch my attention for the wrong reason and the things that catch my attention for the right reason. So when I hold it like this, I look at the weathering here, in here, and I think that looks fantastic. When I look at this piece here, where I've put on some dark weathering and then pulled it back off and it's made a bright spot, that doesn't work at all. So I'm going to need to work on that. That's how I go through a weathering job. It is this process of assessment, composition, modification, and seriously, there'll be a point at which I'm like, I hate it! And I'll start wiping everything off and I'll go at it again. And that always makes it look way better. For the final part of this paint job, I'm going to paint around this square and show you kind of like how, again, one more example of how the secondary rust pass makes these details just pop. So, get a little more turpentine, a little more of that. Yeah. All right, here we go. Just going to come in here and yeah, see that? It's like you utilize the brush's own shape to kind of like, Yep. And sometimes I like look at something like that, like blotch is big. I don't like it. Hit it. Do I like it? No. Hit it again. Do I like it? No. Hit it again. Ooh. Yeah, actually, I like it now. That's how simple this process is. It's iterative. You just got to plow yourself through it. All right, I actually feel like that's a respectable oil path. That's really nice. Okay. I recognize that there is a video in which I am recorded saying I don't prefer acrylic to oil, but the answer is I prefer the oil. And when I hold up the acrylic pass and you see what I can do with acrylic versus what I can do with oil, think it's pretty clear that the oil is just a little bit better. Don't get me wrong, I can get here with acrylics. It just takes me often a little bit longer. I hope that this weathering video is useful to you. Please don't be daunted by weathering. It is always mystifying. Prepare yourself for feeling despair, and it will lead you to despair and then hopefully back out of despair again. Thank you guys. Weather the things in your life. They'll all look more interesting, and I will see you next time.